The Five Families' Last Stand, November 14, 1957, 11:47 p.m. The federal battering ram exploded through the front door of the Palma Boy Social Club, just as Lucky Luciano was reaching for his coat. Glass shattered, wood splintered, and suddenly, the most exclusive meeting in organized crime history became a federal crime scene. 4 men froze around the poker table. Lucky Luciano, the architect of the commission; Carlo Gambino, the quiet calculator who ran Brooklyn like a corporation; Vito Genovese, the ambitious predator who'd been circling Lucky's throne for years; and Joe Bonanno, the old-school Sicilian who trusted no one but family. Federal agents. Nobody moves. 20 FBI agents poured through the shattered entrance, automatic weapons raised, flashlights cutting through the cigar smoke. The basement had only one exit, and it was now blocked by enough firepower to stop an army. But Lucky wasn't looking at the agents. He was looking at the faces around the poker table, because he just realized something that chilled him more than the guns pointed at his head. One of these men had set them up, and Lucky Luciano was about to find out which one. To understand how 4 of America's most powerful crime bosses ended up trapped in a federal raid, you need to understand what brought them together that night. The commission was fracturing. Lucky had built it in 1931 to end the blood feuds that had torn organized crime apart. But by 1957, old tensions were surfacing. Vito Genovese wanted Lucky's position. Carlo Gambino was quietly building his own power base. Joe Bonanno believed the young generation had forgotten the old ways. For months, federal pressure had been mounting. Senate hearings, grand jury investigations, a new attorney general who actually meant business. The families needed to coordinate their response, but none of them trusted the others enough for a formal commission meeting. That's when Lucky proposed something unprecedented. A private gathering. Just the 4 most powerful bosses. No soldiers, no witnesses, no recordings. They would meet at the Palma Boy Social Club, a basement poker room that had been swept for bugs 3 times. November 14th, 11 p.m. The meeting was supposed to last 1 hour. Discuss federal countermeasures, agree on territorial boundaries, present a united front, simple, clean, professional. Instead, it became the biggest federal bust in organized crime history. The game had been going for 47 minutes when the doors exploded inward. 47 minutes of careful conversation, strategic positioning, and subtle testing of loyalties. Long enough for Lucky to notice things that shouldn't be there, like the fact that Vito kept checking his watch, or that Carlo had positioned himself closest to the back wall, where a hidden emergency exit was supposed to be, or that Joe Bonanno seemed remarkably calm for a man facing life in prison. Down on the ground, all of you. Special Agent Robert Kennedy himself stepped through the wreckage, flanked by a dozen marshals. The Attorney General's brother, the man who'd made destroying organized crime his personal mission. "Gentlemen," Kennedy said, his Boston accent cutting through the chaos, "this is what we call checkmate." The 4 bosses remained seated around the poker table, hands visible, none of them making sudden moves. They'd all been arrested before, knew the drill. But Lucky was thinking faster than the others because he'd just realized something crucial. This wasn't a random raid. This was targeted, specific, planned. Someone had told the FBI exactly where to find them, exactly when to strike. "Agent Kennedy," Lucky said calmly, not moving from his chair. "This is a social club. We're playing poker." "Save it, Luciano. We've been watching this place for 3 weeks. We know exactly what kind of meeting this is." 3 weeks. Lucky filed that information away. The meeting had been planned only 5 days ago, discussed only among the 4 men in this room. But if the FBI had been watching for 3 weeks, "You have a warrant?" Carlo asked quietly. Kennedy smiled and pulled out a folded document. "Federal warrant, signed by Judge Morrison himself. Conspiracy, racketeering, interstate commerce violations. We've got enough to put all 4 of you away permanently." Lucky's blood went cold. Judge Morrison. The same judge he'd made his deal with months earlier. The same judge who'd agreed to help revolutionize law enforcement. Either Morrison had betrayed him, or, "Stand up, slowly. Hands where we can see them." The four men rose from their chairs like they were moving through water, each thinking the same thing. How had the most secure meeting in mob history become a trap? That's when Lucky heard it. A sound that shouldn't be there. A faint clicking, almost inaudible under the federal agents shouting. The sound of a recording device being turned off. Someone had been recording the entire meeting. Someone at this table. Lucky's eyes moved from face to face. Vito's jaw was clenched, sweat beading on his forehead. Carlo looked resigned but not surprised. Joe Bonanno was studying his fingernails like a man contemplating a difficult decision. "Before you arrest us," Lucky said quietly, "mind if I ask a question?" "You're not in a position to ask anything, Luciano. Just curious. How'd you know we'd be here tonight?" Kennedy's smile widened. "Reliable source. Someone who understands that cooperation is better than life in prison." Lucky nodded slowly. "Someone in this room." The temperature in the basement seemed to drop 10 degrees. Vito's head snapped up. Carlo's hands stopped moving. Joe Bonanno looked directly at Lucky for the first time since the raid began. "That's enough talking," Kennedy said. "Cuff them." But Lucky wasn't done. "Actually, Agent Kennedy, before your men put those handcuffs on, you might want to check something." "What?" "The basement of this building. Specifically, the walls." Kennedy frowned. "What about them?" Lucky smiled for the first time since the raid began. "They're not what they appear to be." The smile should have been Kennedy's first warning. The second warning should have been the way Carlo Gambino suddenly stepped backward, and the way Joe Bonanno's hand moved toward his jacket pocket, and the way Vito Genovese looked genuinely confused for the first time all evening. But Kennedy was too focused on his victory to notice the details. "Agent Martinez," Kennedy called to one of his men. "Check the walls." Martinez approached the east wall with a flashlight and tapped it with his knuckles. Instead of the solid thunk of concrete, it made a hollow sound. Wood. False paneling. "Sir, this wall is fake." "What do you mean fake?" "I mean there's space behind it. A lot of space." That's when Lucky Luciano revealed what he'd been planning since the moment he'd proposed this meeting. "Agent Kennedy, you've made two serious mistakes tonight. First, you assumed one of us betrayed the others. Second, you assumed this meeting was what it appeared to be." Kennedy's confidence wavered. "What are you talking about?" "I'm talking about the fact that there are 12 emergency exits from this building, and your men are only covering one. I'm talking about the fact that the reliable source who told you about this meeting was supposed to tell you about it. And I'm talking about the fact that none of us are actually trapped." Lucky reached into his jacket pocket, slowly, hands visible. Instead of a gun, he pulled out a small radio transmitter. "Gentlemen, it's been a pleasure." Lucky pressed the button. The lights went out. Not just in the basement, but throughout the entire building. Emergency lighting activated, casting everything in a dim red glow. And in that confusion, the false walls began to move. Carlo Gambino stepped backward and disappeared through what had appeared to be a solid concrete barrier. Joe Bonanno moved to the north wall, pushed a hidden switch, and a section swung inward like a door. Even Vito Genovese, who'd been as surprised as anyone, followed Lucky toward the southeast corner where another panel slid away to reveal a tunnel. The Palma Boy Social Club wasn't just a meeting place. It was a fortress, designed by Lucky himself with multiple escape routes, hidden passages, and contingency plans for exactly this situation. "Stop them," Kennedy shouted, but his agents were stumbling through the darkness, confused by the maze of hidden passages that had suddenly opened around them. Lucky paused at the threshold of his escape tunnel and turned back to Kennedy. "Agent Kennedy, you asked about my reliable source. You want to know who told you about this meeting?" "Who?" "I did." Kennedy's face went blank with confusion. 3 weeks ago, through intermediaries you'd never be able to trace. I made sure you knew about this meeting because I needed you to raid it. Because there's something you haven't figured out yet." "What?" "This wasn't a commission meeting. This was a test. I needed to know which of these men I could trust when things got dangerous, which one would stand with me, and which one would run." Lucky gestured toward the 3 escape routes. Carlo chose loyalty. Joe chose family honor. Vito chose survival. All good choices. All the choices I expected them to make. Then who was the informant? Lucky's smile was genuinely warm for the first time all evening. There wasn't one, Agent Kennedy. There was never going to be one. Because the four most powerful men in American organized crime don't betray each other to federal agents. We're not amateurs, but the recording device was mine. Insurance, in case one of them actually was planning betrayal. Instead, it recorded exactly what I hoped. Four men who might compete with each other, but who understand that cooperation is stronger than competition. Lucky began backing into the tunnel. Oh, and Agent Kennedy? You might want to check the building's basement again in about 10 minutes. I have a feeling you're going to find some interesting evidence about a gambling operation we've been investigating ourselves. Consider it our gift to federal law enforcement. Lucky disappeared into the tunnel, just as backup generators kicked in, restoring full lighting to the basement. Kennedy and his agents found themselves alone in an empty room, surrounded by false walls and hidden passages, holding a federal warrant that was now completely useless. The evidence they found 10 minutes later led to the arrest of a mid-level gambling syndicate that had been cutting into legitimate family operations. The syndicate's books contained enough information to satisfy Kennedy's superiors that the raid had been a success, even if the primary targets had escaped. Meanwhile, in 4 different locations across the city, Luciano, Carlo Gambino, Vito Genovese, and Joe Bonanno emerged from underground tunnels. They met 2 hours later at a diner in Queens, where they shared coffee and discussed what they'd learned. "You could have warned us," Vito said. But he was smiling when he said it. "Would have ruined the test," Lucky replied. "I needed to see how each of you reacted under real pressure." "And?" Carlo asked. "And I learned that when federal agents kick down the door, none of you panic, none of you point fingers, and all of you think strategically, even when you think you're about to be arrested." Joe Bonanno raised his coffee cup. "To friends who trust you enough to test you, and to enemies who are predictable enough to be useful," Lucky added. The 4 men who'd started the evening as potential rivals ended it as confirmed allies. Agent Kennedy would spend the next 5 years wondering how the biggest organized crime bust in federal history had turned into a public relations victory for the mob. But Lucky Luciano knew the answer. Real power wasn't about avoiding your enemies. It was about controlling when and where you encountered them. And sometimes, the best way to strengthen your alliances was to put them under pressure and see what happened. November 14th, 1957. 4 crime bosses walked into a federal trap and turned it into a loyalty test. Agent Kennedy learned that night that arresting organized crime leaders required more than good intelligence and superior firepower. It required understanding that when you're dealing with men who think 10 moves ahead, sometimes the trap isn't for them. Sometimes the trap is for you. Lucky was right about one thing. In this business, the people who survive aren't the strongest ones. They're the ones who understand that even your enemies can be useful, if you're smart enough to know how to use them. If this story blew your mind, hit that subscribe button. We're telling the Lucky Luciano stories that even the FBI doesn't know about. Drop a like if you think Lucky's escape plan was genius, and let us know in the comments. Could you have planned an escape this elaborate? Next time, we're revealing how Lucky Luciano convinced 3 rival families to work together by starting a war between them. You won't believe this strategy,